Hi, today we have Mr. Armistead. He is the high school science teacher, and today I'm going to be interviewing him. What inspired you to teach science?
So I've been interested in science ever since I was probably in first or second grade. I remember reading a book that was about stars and how they worked. And it was the first time in my life I ever found something that didn't really make sense to me when I first read it. And so I was really interested in trying to figure out how that worked. And so ever since then, I've been interested in science. When I went to college, I intended on doing science research. But then after I got to college, I decided I enjoyed teaching a lot more. And so that's why I decided to become a science teacher.
Okay. What is your favorite thing about teaching?
I really enjoy trying out new things, trying to figure out better ways of helping students to be able to learn. I like reading about things, about how people learn, and trying to just work out, how could I make my own practice better to make students learn more?
What is an element in science?
So, element is basically a type of material that's one of the building blocks of matter. Matter is made up of little tiny pieces called particles, like grains of sand, only much, much smaller. And so all matter is made up of so far we've found only 118 elements. And the smallest piece of an element is called an atom. And so we can basically make any substance out of those 118. It's sort of like Legos. You only have like 5 or 6 blocks of Legos, but you can build anything out of those 5 or 6 blocks if you put them together in different ways. And so the elements are like the building blocks of matter.
Nice. Has there been any explosions?
Fortunately, not in any of my classes, at least not when I've had students around. I did have once when it was after school and I was testing something out to make sure it was safe, and I did have a very small explosion inside a bottle that blew a cork out into the ceiling, and there's still a dent in the ceiling over here where the cork hit it, and so I'm glad I tested it out when there were no students around to make sure it was safe beforehand, but that's the only explosion I've ever had in one of my classes.
What things would you teach in your science classes?
So I'm a physical science and chemistry and physics teacher. And so that means that I basically deal with most anything that's not living. So we look at things like matter and trying to understand what things are made of and how that we can use the properties of matter to predict what things are going to do. We look at the forces between things as things push or pull on each other. We look at things like waves, like how do we use waves, like how does your phone get information? It uses like radio waves, and how does that information get sent there? And then basically things along those lines. Those are some of the major topics. With energy is another big one that we look at. How do we power things? How does energy work? Those are sort of the big topics.
Nice. And then my last question is, what does E equals MC squared stand for?
So that is Einstein's most famous equation. And so Einstein was a scientist that lived about 100 years ago. And one of the things he was studying was how energy, that's the E, and mass, that's the M, are related. Mass is basically the property of matter that means that when you push on it, it makes it so it doesn't want to move. If you take a car and you shove it, it doesn't move very far. But if you take a pencil and you shove it, it moves really fast. It's because the car has more mass. And so Einstein was able to figure out that energy and mass are basically like two sides of the same coin. They're related to each other. And so the E is the amount of energy, the M is the amount of mass. Now C is the speed of light. And so one of the things that scientists discovered about 100 years ago is that the speed of light never changes. And so it turns out that that's really important in understanding the way the universe works. And Einstein was able to show that the amount of energy in something is equal to its mass times the speed of light, which is squared. And so it's basically just a way of relating together two things that seem like they're completely different things, but a lot of science is showing that things that look a lot different are actually really tightly related. And that's one of the reasons why science is so cool.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right, you're welcome.
Bye.